Good morning. My name is Felicia Orth, hearing officer in the matter OCC 24683 relating to well plugging and financial assurance. We are on day 9 of the hearing, and we've reached another public comment session. I have 2 names on the list of folks who wanted a spot this morning, and I think we also have some folks in the room. If you are on the platform, please raise your virtual hand, or if you have called in using your phone, please press *5. So the first person I have who may be on the platform is Lauren Pagel. Lauren Pagel. I think it was EP, Sheila, up there. Yeah. Great. Ms. Pagel, can you unmute yourself? There you are.
Yes, thank you so much.
Hi, would you spell your first and last name, please?
Yes, it's Lauren and P as in Peter, Agel.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
I'll start your 3 minutes.
Great. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Lauren Pagel. I'm the policy director at Earthworks, where I focus primarily on federal oil and gas policy. For nearly 2 decades, I've watched the federal government struggle and too often fail to make the oil and gas industry take full responsibility for its pollution and cleanup. At the federal level, bonding rules were frozen in time for more than 60 years. Until 2024, companies operating on public lands could post as little as $10,000 per lease and $25,000 statewide to cover cleanup. While the BLM finally updated those minimums last year, $150,000 per lease and $500,000 statewide, even those levels fall far short of the real costs to plug wells and restore land. And now, with the Trump administration moving quickly to roll back key environmental protections, potentially revisiting the new bonding rule, expanding drilling on public land and waters, and the federal system right now is heading in the wrong direction. The push for energy dominance has come at the expense of accountability and community health before, and the states like New Mexico will once again be left to clean up the mess. It's also worth noting that we're unlikely to see another major federal investment in well plugging like the one made under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which provided $4.7 billion nationwide to clean up orphaned wells. That funding was an extraordinary one-time effort, not a sustainable solution. Going forward, states are going to have to solve the problem themselves, and strong bonding rules are the clearest way and clearest path to do that. Right now, companies can still drill hundreds of wells under a single outdated blanket bond. When these wells stop producing, taxpayers are left to foot the bill for cleanup. That's not fair, and it's not sustainable. Strong bonding rules ensure that companies internalize the true cost of doing business, the true cost of drilling, and that cleanup as part of the business plan at the start, not an afterthought. At the end of the day, it's up to states to protect their people, their communities, public health, and taxpayer dollars. New Mexico has a real opportunity here to ensure that those who profit from extraction are the ones who pay to clean it up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Pagel. Jonathan Olivas is the next one. Hello, Mr. Olivas.
Good morning.
Good morning. Would you spell your first and last name for the transcript, please?
Yes, it's Jonathan, Jonathan, Olivas, Olivas.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. I'll start your time.
Thank you. Like I said, my name is Jonathan Olivas, and I first want to thank you for allowing me to speak today to the commission. I am a lifetime New Mexican. My family comes from Cuba, New Mexico, and my grandfather, POW from World War II, is one of a handful of Purple Heart recipients from Cuba, New Mexico. So I'm very invested and love this beautiful state. As an entrepreneur, I have participated in several different industries in the state, mostly construction. But in all of these industries, I understand that oil and gas affects all lives here in New Mexico. I love that the fact that New Mexico is a place of great beauty and abundant natural resources. I also treasure the fact that most in our state appreciate that and want to protect both our beautiful lands, but also appreciate the blessing of the abundance of natural resources that we have here. Also, happy belated birthday to President Teddy Roosevelt, an awesome president and a great champion of conservation in this country. From my perspective as a business owner here in the state, I understand the importance of a good oversight in any industry. And also as an advocate for positive change in our education system, our struggling education system, I know how important the oil and gas industry and the revenue generated is to our education system, especially considering the fact that just recently we've added universal childcare here in the state and expect to be hiring about 3,500 childcare workers, which will be directly affected, by the revenue that is generated here. As a contractor, I can understand how overregulation can hamper business and in turn affect profitability, productivity, and of course, jobs and families overall. I do appreciate you commissioners looking out for the best interest of all New Mexicans. Ultimately, the Oil Conservation Commission has the final say about regulations for this industry. And I would just like you to consider the unintended consequences of these regulations. Among these, I believe, would be loss of revenue, loss of jobs, and actually more abandoned wells, and would affect our struggling education system. I would just like to entreat the commission to take these thoughts into consideration as they make their decision. And ultimately, I believe you guys will make the best decision for your constituents and for this great state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olivas. Is there anyone else on the platform who'd like to offer comment during this session? Our next session will be at 4 o'clock this afternoon. No? All right. I think we have some folks in the room. Mr. Davis? You would spell your first and last name, please.
Tim Davis, TIMDAVIS.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your time.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer, Commissioner Ampoma. I'm Tim Davis. I'm a staff attorney with Wild Earth Guardians, and Wild Earth Guardians, supports the proposed rule. If you drill a well or you acquire a well, plugging, cleanup, and remediation should be your responsibility, and you cannot offload this responsibility on New Mexicans. I'd like to make a few points about the proposed rule. First, it makes clear that drilling or well acquisition cannot occur until financial assurance is provided. It increases the cost of financial assurance for single wells to more accurately reflect the actual cost of cleanup, while ensuring that blanket bonds for active wells are posted at the statutory maximum, which falls well short of providing for actual cleanup costs, but it is the maximum that this commission can do at this time under the Oil and Gas Act. Additionally, the proposed rule defines marginal wells and sets financial assurance for marginal and inactive wells that will guard against New Mexicans getting stuck with the bill for wells that are at high risk of being orphaned. Second, the proposed rule tightens transfer rules to protect against risk. Before operators are allowed to acquire wells, they should be required to show that they are compliant with OCD rules, like those for plugging and abandonment, and also for methane venting and flaring. They should also be required to show compliance with rules from other jurisdictions. The proposed rule requires this and will protect against poorly funded or non-compliant operators taking on wells, which is a common path to wells becoming abandoned and orphaned. And third, the proposed rule requires timely cleanup. Current rules allow operators to indefinitely defer plugging inactive wells. The proposed rule requires operators to demonstrate that the well will be returned to beneficial use within a reasonable period of time in order to be granted initial or renewed temporary abandonment status. This helps prevent abandoned wells from continuing to leak pollutants like methane into our environment when they should have been plugged long ago. The bottom line is that New Mexicans should not get stuck with the bill for cleaning up the industry's mess. That's not just the financial bill, but also the public health bill and the environmental bill. If a company drills a well or acquires one, it owns not just what it pulls out of the earth. It also owns the cost of cleanup. If you drill it, you must clean it up without exception. This should not be controversial, and the proposed rule is a reasonable effort to keep New Mexicans from getting stuck with the industry's liabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Should have also mentioned, I believe we have Commissioner Bloom on the platform. Is there anyone else in the room or on the platform who would like to offer public comment at this time? Again, our next session is at 4 p.m. All right, we will move back to the technical case then. Thank you for putting up the slide there. And I believe,
Madam Hearing Officer,
Mr.
just a couple of housekeeping matters. First of all, I'm the one saying it, but all council here deserve credit. We reasonably forecast that we will be done next week. There will no overlap, and probably we're going to be done before Friday. Things depend. If Namoga, like I said, I'm pleased to be able to take the credit, but the credit is deserved to Commissioner Mpoma all throughout all council. If Namoga ends tomorrow, I am prepared to open. I also have my first 2 witnesses lined up to testify if we have that much time. If for some reason we're not at 5 o'clock after my second witness tomorrow, I don't have my third witness or another witness lined up. We will be finishing early, and I just want to advise the commission and you, Madam Hearing Officer, that I'll be requesting early adjournment if that comes to pass. So,
thank you.
And I've talked with all council, and I think everybody agrees. So,
all right, thank you, Mr. Cloutier, for that. All right, let's see, Mr. Suazo, you are 44 minutes into Mr. McGowan's direct by my record keeping.
That is consistent with our timer as well.
Great.
Thank you, Madam
Thank
Hearing
you.
Officer. Mr. McGowan is back on the stand. Mr. McGowan, good morning.
Good morning.
So we left off yesterday after you'd finished, well, we're going to start with the proposed new classification of marginal wells and financial assurance obligation. So starting with your slide 23, can you please explain, Can you please explain the importance of marginal wells?
Well, many marginal wells are maintained for reasons that go beyond short-term volume. And one of the big ones is strategic lease retention. And that's important from the point of view of operators that are trying to bring capital to develop new reserves. So running room is critical. Once you test an idea, you really need a place to go continue to use that idea. So you don't want to take the risk to prove up a new concept in an area and then not have anywhere to go with it. Because that's how you spread out the risk, because this is a risk-based business. Because anytime you try something new, there's risk involved. So the lease retention is a part of that. I can go into that more later, but pressure support and future candidates for EOR projects, of course. In EOR context, these wells may become injection wells, pilot wells for reservoir evaluation. There's also types of huff and puff, what they call it, EOR, and I can talk about that later. I've done some of that in my career. Additionally, maintaining marginal production can preserve access to the subsurface estate. Keep the leases active. Something that's really important when you go into a play, if you're bringing capital, is do I have the leases? Do I have the right to drill here? And once you go into a play and things start to heat up a little bit, it's really hard to put those units back together if they fall apart. So that would be important to folks trying to bring capital. for many operators, particularly small and mid-sized independents, marginal wells are the backbone of sustained cash flow. So marginal wells and stripper wells account for a significant share of U.S. oil and gas production. My focus I'm trying to bring from my point of view in my career is really the opportunity loss that might go with that, and the importance of just considering that and making these decisions.
Very good. And moving on to your slide 74, what is the new definition of marginal well that is under consideration?
Oil or gas well that produced less than 180 days and less than 1,000 BOE within a consecutive 12-month period.
Okay. And what risks does this threshold for what are deemed or to be considered, proposed to be considered marginal, that are present?
Well, the situation that I'm trying to visualize is I'm thinking of myself coming into this situation as an operator. And I can think of examples in my career where this would have actually eliminated a lot of my candidate wells before I even got started with my project. So that's one of my big concerns here. And it's not necessarily this in isolation. It's more about how this interacts with all the other changes to the rules. Because I'm trying to understand how all these interact, and coming at it as an operator, not as an attorney, and realizing that it's like a computer program. If I change one thing here, it's got an impact somewhere else. So, the exact numbers are not that important to me. It's more about how that works with all the other changes to the rules.
Okay. So based on that insight, what is your bottom line recommendation to the commission with respect to this proposed marginal well definition?
Well, New Mexico has all kinds of different wells, and it's got many marginal wells that could serve long-term strategic functions and maybe already do. Also noted in Dan Arthur's testimony, the proposed definition, when you're trying to flag uneconomic wells, risks sweeping in a number of wells that would be productive or could be productive and are strategically maintained. So again, I think I've said this multiple times, but I'm not at all against what everybody's trying to do here. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that let's just think about what might be unintended consequences from these many changes this fast.
All right, so let's move on to the restrictions on operator registrations and changes of operator. We're going to skip some slides and just go on to your analysis slide. What are the problems and potential impacts of the proposed changes to operator registration and transfers?
Well, I've never seen anything like this before. So as an operator, I'm trying to understand how, again, I'm not an attorney, so I don't understand how New Mexico can then reach into regulations from other states. And then you could have something going on in another state that's not particularly egregious that ends up holding up your deal. You lose your capital backing, you lose the deal. So you're not able to deploy capital. So I'm just concerned about that. I've never seen that before. I understand trying to make sure that you're not working with bad actors, that you don't want bad actors coming to the state. So I'm not saying you shouldn't figure out a solution, but that delays operator transfers. And, I have sold assets in the oil and gas industry and transferred them to the next operator. On Navidad Resources LLC, basically we peeled wells out that needed to be plugged and we transferred the other assets to the new operator. And then I actually went out personally and plugged the wells. So, I'm all for taking care of your stuff and cleaning up your mess. I'm just not sure whether this would have a chilling effect on capital formation for folks that are trying to come in and do future development.
All right, very good. And in the interest of time, we're going to jump to slide 82. Slide 81 has a comparison with some other jurisdictions. But on slide 82, can you kind of go into greater detail on why these proposed changes are further problematic?
Well, I was thinking about a scenario where you had, let's just say there's an operator that has an idea of what they think they can do with a particular property. And I'm visualizing a property that's probably vertical wells with a number of inactive wells and some marginal wells. maybe it's a couple of hundred wells. So as they come into the project, they would need to gather and certify P&A plans for every inactive well across all their states, I guess, is the way I'm reading it. I mean, I'm not an attorney again, but I'm just trying to understand what it says. And then they would have to get their status approved in New Mexico. So the way that Texas treats the marginal wells is very different. And inactive wells, they've actually have some incentives. I want to talk about a little bit about that later, but they have incentives to try to preserve those wells. So they have a totally different philosophy. I just having raised capital, and that's not easy to do. You need to, I've worked with private individuals to put in capital, but I also worked with industry partners, and I also worked with private equity. So you've got to be able to walk in there with a plan that you can execute, that there's a high probability that you could execute that plan. So anything that we would refer to in the industry as hair on the deal, like dropping your lollipop in a barbershop, that would be a big problem. And so you might not ever get your project off the ground to bring capital to increase production, which has all the benefits that New Mexico.
So moving on to, I guess, your assessment of the practicality of the proposals on your slide 83, in your opinion, is it even feasible for a seller to certify the buyer's compliance across various jurisdictions?
I would think it's not in all cases, but it could be some minor thing that you've got going on that you're trying to deal with, and it would hold up your whole project and hold up your capital formation. So again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to root out the bad actors. I'm not saying that. I'm just a little concerned that this is a big overreach and might have unforeseen consequences.
All right, let's move on to your overarching recommendations that are part of your direct testimony. Can you walk us through these recommendations, please?
Well, the use of a rigid production number to figure out whether the well has any future value is, as far as I can tell, completely arbitrary. It's not science-based. It's not economics-based necessarily, other than you think maybe the wells might not be producing in paying quantities. But it's a completely arbitrary number. But it's not based on any science or any future potential or any opportunity loss that's included in that. I would recommend preserving and strengthening the existing temporary abandonment program. Now, again, I've learned a lot from being in these hearings and listening to everybody, and I've tried to internalize all that as we've gone through this. So I'm not saying you don't have a problem that needs to be solved, and I'm not saying the industry shouldn't clean up its mess. And I can talk a little bit more about that later, but I'm very passionate about the industry cleaning up their mess, actually, because the bad actors make the rest of us look bad. I think you should use some pressure testing to serve as the primary means of demonstrating mechanical integrity. That's a reliable way to do it, that you don't have any mechanical risk by going back into the well and trying to do things that where you might end up with a fishing job. So, and then use your logging when you need to use it. When you see an indication of a problem or age, or there's some other indicator that's, first principles engineering based to get that additional cost. I was thinking about it this way. It's sort of like what they figured out about getting colonoscopies is they figured out, well, maybe we shouldn't do these so often because every once in a while we kill somebody when we do this. So maybe there's a practical limit here. I would adopt a risk-based bonding framework. And again, I've talked about this a little earlier. Corrosion is dependent upon the age of the well and the fluid system in the well, and whether you've used corrosion inhibitor throughout the life of the well, whether you've done a good job of your corrosion inhibition. These are things these is all known technology and science. Okay, and then the well type, basically. Now the depth, yeah, you can figure that in, but that's the reason you've got this skewed data. And I do think maybe that's why we're seeing all these different estimates of what it costs to P&A a well, is because we're dealing with different populations that have different, in statistics, we might call that a bimodal population, right? So So I think there's some more statistical work that needs to be done to figure out exactly what's driving those big outliers. I would do some root cause analysis on those outliers and try to figure out, well, why did this happen? Why did I spend $5 million to plug this little bitty well? I've got a feeling it was probably from a fishing job and maybe some contamination of the groundwater or something like that. But, so risk-based bonding, collaborate with the industry to define realistic cost benchmarks. And somehow everybody needs to come to a conclusion about what it really costs to plug these wells. And really going forward, what's it going to cost in the future? So if you're looking at ancient wells with a lot of corrosion problems and bad cement and bad practices from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, 50s, that's a whole different world than modern completion systems and the way people complete wells, particularly the way people are drilling horizontal wells. We just are better at these things. We've got better quality materials, better equipment, and people know what they're doing better than they used to. So, and figure out some way to do a responsible operator transition. Just encouraging. Okay. I mean, obviously everybody, the state has its goals, and I appreciate what everybody's trying to do. Nobody dislikes bad operators more than I do. Okay. So here's what I would say about that is if you could figure out a way to make sure you don't have bad actors coming in, but not chill capital formation and don't chill acquisitions, or you're bringing people in to fix all your problems that have the money to do it. So you don't want to run them off into a different state. You want them to come to New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. And on your final slide, I think in your direct, you've raised some important, context and, recognize the difficult position that the commission and industry is in. Can you touch on, the big picture of your expert opinions for your last slide, please?
Well, I first off want to say I applaud what the OCD is trying to do. I think they're working hard to solve this problem, and that's a great thing. But we need to figure out a way to not throw out the baby with the bathwater. So something else to think about is that the oil and gas companies are also taxpayers, and then their employees are taxpayers, and the service companies that work with them are all folks that are making money by having jobs in New Mexico. So all of that we need to keep up, right? Job creation and economic growth. And then we need to figure out a constructive way to work together. And throughout my career, I've always tried to strive for a win-win proposition. And if there's any way that we can all get there, that would be fabulous. I think it's possible. So if you could come up, with rules that are intended to support the New Mexico's mission while safeguarding long-term viability of responsible oil and gas development, that would be my recommendation. And I would be happy to entertain. I've got all kinds of ideas about things that could be done, but that wasn't really part of my scope of work.
Understood. Well, thank you for your direct testimony. We're going to move on to your rebuttal testimony, starting with slide 88. What are some of your overarching concerns with the applicant's case as articulated by their various witnesses and other experts in their direct testimony?
I think listening to everybody and listening how this has all gone so far, it seems like we need to do a better job of scrubbing this data and really get down to brass tacks about, well, how many orphan wells do we really have? How many inactive wells do we really have? I mean, I'm hearing different estimates from different folks. Everybody's working hard. These are all smart people. But I know from my own experience, I've done a lot of projects where I looked at huge databases, like an entire field, thousands of wells. And I know how hard it is to scrub the data. Sometimes the quality of the data is not that good. So it takes time and effort to go in and scrub the data and get a good answer. So I would say that that's what I'm speaking to on number one, really. And then the next thing would be, I was really baffled by this idea that speculative is now a dirty word. Because as I think I said before, I've been doing speculative things in the oil patch for 40 years. Every advance that we've ever made in the oil and gas industry to find new ways to extract oil and gas and create energy independence for this country, so we aren't dependent on foreign powers, has been speculative. I can give you multiple examples where somebody had a hypothesis and they needed to test that hypothesis, and you need a bit of running room. So, so the applicants, experts, I realize what they're trying to do. They're trying to get this thing into a box and make it really easy to figure out. The problem is this is a messy industry in more ways than one. One of the ways it's messy is that it's dark down there. We don't exactly know what we're dealing with downhole. And with all the tools we have, those are all indirect measurements. Those are not direct measurements. So we're having to take this data and try to figure out what we think that means. And we also don't necessarily know how a technology used one area will work in another area, because Mother Nature gets a vote and hers is the only one that counts, right? So you have to figure this out by trial and error. So that's a speculative process necessarily. So I think if there's any way that the parties can figure out how to deal with that issue, not to squelch innovation and capital formation and value creation, and at the same time protect the environment. That's critical. So now driving the small operators out of business inadvertently, maybe, or even advertently, is a slippery slope, because you might end up with a bunch of folks just handing you the keys and walking away and leaving you with more problems than you anticipated you were going to have. So it's going to be a shock to the system if you do. For what I'm seeing, it feels like it's going to be a shock to the whole system. And you may have folks that just end up folding up their tent and leaving you with the problem. So that's certainly not something anybody wants.
Thank you. And moving on to slide 89, did you identify any errors or inconsistencies and issues with applicants' P&A cost data that they've based their estimated average well P&A costs and financial assurance changes on?
Well, I looked at the Moss database and I did my best to double and triple check it, my analysis, and I just am coming up with a bit different set of numbers. I came up with about 128,000 versus I think it was 160 something. And then again, this is a data scrubbing issue, right? You really need to go in there and make sure that and that may take a little time and some effort. And maybe more than one party can work on it together to try to make sure the scrubbing is done correctly. But you don't want to double count. And I mean, it's a complicated problem and it's a lot of data. So, I appreciate that it's not easy to get the right answer right off the bat. So now what I'm seeing is, and what I understand is that those orphaned wells, well, those are going to be some of the worst operators. I've looked at orphaned wells. Recently I went out and I was looking at orphaned wells to see if maybe I could take them over. And I went on site, looked at all those wells and examined them and looked at, how they ended up being in the process. Well, I could see that operator was not a very good operator. And that's something I looked at. So, that it ends up making a biased data set is my point. So again, if you could figure out, well, how do I sort out the really bad ones, figure out what that's going to cost, and then figure out, well, what's the rest of this data set? What are these going to cost? So that would be that's just my recommendation from an engineering analysis point of view. I understand what Mr. Purvis is trying to do with the holdback concept. I'm not totally sure how it informs the process. I mean, I think it's a little bit obvious that, yeah, eventually there's not enough juice left for the squeeze. But the thing that I don't see in there as part of that is what about the opportunity loss? Let's not forget that, because that's been my job for 40 years, is to try to look for opportunities and then execute on those opportunities. So, and again, there's this issue of, well, who are the contractors that you're working with in New Mexico? What are the problems you're dealing with in New Mexico? Probably a data set from New Mexico would be very helpful. I was thinking too, if I was going to do this on my own, I would probably want to, I would start with a procedure under the new rules, whatever that is for whatever you're doing, plugging or temporary abandonment. I'd figure the cost on that. I'd build up an AFE, an authorization for expenditure, and then what we normally do in the industry is we figure out there is a trouble-free number, and then there is a contingency you apply to that. There's a percentage that you apply. That's based on a statistical analysis. So I think I would borrow from that practice in the industry and try to figure out a way to come up with what the cost ought to be.
To your knowledge, is Mr. Purvis's holdback theory any sort of industry standard?
I'd never heard of it before, and I don't see it built into the various economic models. But I mean, I understand what he's trying to get at. So I'm not throwing rocks at him on that. I'm just saying that it's not really something that's widely used in the industry.
Now, let's stay on the financial assurance and P&A costs on your slide 90. What are your closing thoughts on whether the $150,000 flat fee for bonding represents the reasonable cost to P&AOL?
I'm sorry, could you say the question?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on whether the $150,000 flat bonding fee represents a reasonable cost to P&AOL?
Now, I understood that was the 150 is the per well bonding, right?
Yes.
Not a flat, yeah. So, well, this is where some of my confusion has come in looking at all this information, right? Is you've got this factoid here that the New Mexico Oil and Gas Justice and Reform Act, they showed that they thought that the P&A cost was $70,000 a well. And then when we look at the data set from the orphaned wells, we see a much higher number. Well, that really doesn't surprise me, right? Because if you got a total average across all plugging, across the larger population, and then you've got a biased sample of the worst wells, well, I would expect the worst wells to have a higher number. So again, everybody needs to figure out what is the real number we ought to be dealing with and what's it based on. Now, there's also this issue of this hard cap of a $250,000 blanket financial assurance. Something that I've been really struggling with is this 15% cliff, where I'm just visualizing I'm the operator, and I'm thinking I've got my financial assurance all figured out, and then I have something happen where I lose some of my wells go offline, and it triggers. It feels like what you end up with is a de facto, like could be a $15 million blanket because you had to do it on every well. So essentially it becomes a blanket on all your wells. This seems a little terrifying when I start thinking about if I was doing planning as an operator. So if there's some way to soften that or do something different with that, I would recommend taking a look at that. Now, Arthur and Emmerich, they had some persuasive discussion. I learned a lot by listening to those folks, and I've learned a lot from listening to both sides, by the way. I would say that, again, this is more of a let's try to base this bonding on some sort of realistic number. If there's if I know what the actual cost is going to be, let's use that number. That's what I would say.
Very good. Let's move on to your Appendix A. I think you have some interesting observations you'd like to share, starting on slide 91. And I'm going to let you walk through this slide and also let us know when you want to transition to the next sets of slides, just because they're more or less related.
Okay, well, I just looked at this one area. I didn't look at everything in the state, but what I was trying to get across here is you'll notice that there's kind of this is land track unit by trajectory. So there's kind of this purple. Well, that's acreage that eventually became horizontal acreage. And then you see the little yellow dots. Well, those are vertical wells. So this was 1960 to 1990. Now, we knew how to do hydraulic fracturing back then. What we didn't know was all the enabling technologies. So somebody said something about we've been doing hydraulic fracturing since 1950. Well, sure. But we've done a lot of innovating and a lot of thinking, and a lot of figuring, and a lot of patent work in the intervening years. So, for example, the composite bridge plug, away from cast iron bridge plugs. I was the expert for Halliburton defending their composite bridge plug patent when it first came out. Well, that was a huge deal. It doesn't sound like much, but you can drill the thing up in a few minutes, and it turns to mush, and you can wash it out of the well, versus something that you may not be able to get out of the horizontal ever. So, just one example. So, what you're looking at here is this is enabling technologies for horizontal multi-stage hydraulic fracturing. Okay, so go to the next one. And you see there's some more vertical wells that pop up. Next slide. And you start seeing some purple show up here. So this is where somebody looked at what was going on in other parts of the world. Okay, for example, Texas, and they went, "Gee, I wonder if this technology will work in New Mexico." That would have been speculation at that point, right? Because nobody'd done it before, and Mother Nature gets the vote, right? So go to the next slide. The first guys that went in there, they got it to work. And somebody said, well, could it work over here, right? So they started moving and testing and moving and testing, pilot testing and moving. Go to the next slide. Is there another slide? There you go. So what I did is I zoomed in. And one of the big things everybody didn't know that they've been trying to figure out is what's the spacing going to be between these horizontal wells, right? Because nobody really knew that. And they still are trying to figure that out today. Okay, I've been to multiple conferences on this recently. And so that tells you how much resources available. So now you notice there's vertical wells sprinkled in here. They're doing things like pressure monitoring. They're using them for, you can run microseismic phones in those and figure out where the frac's going. So there's utilization there that's potential. So I was just trying to point out, just reminding everybody, how did New Mexico become this powerhouse in production? Well, it was through speculative use of vertical properties that held the acreage, allowed capital formation, and then allowed innovation to occur, and allowed you to basically have a pilot program. I can test my idea and walk my way through it with iteratively gaining information. That's the engineering design process.
Now let's move on to your Appendix B, where you provide some redevelopment examples and some comparative analysis. What did your analysis reveal?
Well, basically, in a nutshell, I went through and just did some research and to think about, well, how did all this stuff that I just showed you on that slide happen? Okay. Well, why don't you just go to the next slide? I can talk about some of the particular deals. You can see all these deals right here. So some of these might have been publicly traded companies, and some of these, so they're raising their money from the public. Some of these are companies that are private equity backed, but somebody needed to bring capital to make this happen. So they want to know that when they come into that area, they're going to be able to go develop this stuff, and they're going to know that all of their opportunity set isn't going to evaporate on them before they even get their idea tested. So just think of the amount of capital that's brought in here. Now, am I saying that you shouldn't clean stuff up? No. Just want to make that perfectly clear. I'm saying the industry's got to clean up its mess, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Very good. Next slide, please.
And really, this is just walking you through some examples of how folks leveraged the existing infrastructure. And from a long-term speculator, when I see an old well, I immediately look at it and think, what could I do with this thing that I could get cheap and then turn it into something great? Because that's been what I've done my whole career.
So I guess moving on to slide 103, in summary, what is your Appendix B intended to show the commission?
I'm just trying to remind everybody of how New Mexico got to be this powerhouse. And, they're, what is it, number 2 in the country now? That's a big deal. And it's great for the country. It's great for New Mexico. Obviously, there's problems. And a lot of those problems are from things that happened a long time ago when folks didn't do things the way they should have before even some of these regulations existed. So, yes, got to clean that up. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm sorry I keep saying that, but.
Understood. Well, thank you for that. I know if the commission has any questions for you related to these case studies you've provided, you'd be glad to answer them. That concludes our rebuttal testimony. We don't have surrebuttal slides, but we do have some surrebuttal questions and comments. So we're going to move on to that. Mr. McGowan, did you have any comments with respect to the questioning of Mr. Dan Arthur regarding the treatment of marginal wells under federal law?
Well, I got to thinking about that because I was a little confused.
Objection. How is this, sir, rebuttal?
Because, well, it's in response to.
He's responding to Mr. Arthur's testimony. Is that what you said?
the questions to Mr. Arthur's testimony. Cross.
So he's sir rebutting his own witness testimony? That's not sir rebuttal.
No, he's sir rebutting the questions that were asked on
That,
cross.
that still is not sir rebuttal. You need to, sir rebuttal is rebutting, and this is in the procedural order. Sir rebuttal is rebutting rebuttal testimony from another witness.
Right.
You don't sir rebut questions.
I will ask him how that pertains to Welk's witnesses on the marginal well issue.
The procedure order is very clear with sir rebuttal, and the hearing officer has also been very clear on a number of occasions about sir rebuttal, and that is, in order to introduce sir rebuttal, you need to identify the specific rebuttal that is being sir rebutted.
So whose rebuttal testimony would he be sir rebutting on the marginal well issue, Mr. Spazo?
It would be Mr. Alexander's.
Mr. Alexander's. Okay.
Then I would just ask that you identify the rebuttal testimony from Mr. Alexander by page number and what the substance of the testimony is so that we know that it's proper sir.
Sure.
Okay.
See if I can find that. Give me just a second. Let me come back to this question and we'll move on to the other sir rebuttal questions we have. Mr. McGowan, what is your response to applicant's expert Thomas Alexander's indication that operators are constantly monitoring wells somehow means that operators would not need a lot of time to rebut the proposed presumption of no beneficial use?
Okay, so the flaw I see in that reasoning is, yes, you're monitoring production. So let's just give I'll give you an example. If I were to start off with a project that I'm working on currently, so what I'm looking at doing is going into a field that has legacy wells, and I want to apply a stimulation technique that's never been done before. What I want to do is I actually want to stimulate two dual opposed open hole lateral horizontal wells that are parallel to each other. And then I'm going to do this basically with just water, and then shut the wells in, allow the water to imbibe into the matrix, push oil into the fractures. So now nobody's ever done that in this field. Now I've done that similar things in other places, and I'm borrowing ideas from the Permian, from I'm borrowing ideas from like the 1990s, and I want to go try that. So if I want to try that, I'm not going to go, I'm making a deal right now. It's taken about a year to negotiate, but I'm about to get a deal done where I would work with a bigger operator and I'd bring the technology and the ideas, and they bring part of the capital. So in that situation, they've got about 50 wells. So I think I've got 50 candidates for this. It's a combination of restimulation and enhanced oil recovery. So the issue is that, I'm not going to go try. I don't want to go try this on just 2 wells and then have me, I'm kicked out of the program. Neither did they. Also, we don't know if it's going to work or not. Now, I've got good science to support that, but there would be many people who would disagree with me, and nobody else has tried it in this field, and the field's been around since the 90s. So why did nobody else try it? Well, nobody else has my particular experience set. I'm not that smarter than anybody else. I just have a different experience set. So in that case, I can imagine where my legacy wells, what if I end up having to plug those out before I can actually get around to proving it up? So I've got to convince, it's taken me about a year to negotiate the deal. And then it's going to take me time to go form capital. And then I've got to execute the first wells. And then that's going to take at least 6 months, maybe a year before we actually have enough production data to go, well, I've got a reliable ultimate recovery, and I can project economic analysis on just these 2. Well, now I need to do a couple more and a couple more. I need a statistically significant set for anybody to want to pour a lot of capital into it. And then we might go into a mode where we do a bunch of these. So in that particular case, what would be a horrible thing for us to have happen would be that we end up having to plug out our wells because we had to go to a regulatory body that they don't believe my story. Well, it's not unusual for me to find that if I have 3 petroleum engineers, I have 5 opinions. Okay, so that's we can't agree on anything hardly. And I've had many things happen in the past. I've had the top reservoir engineer in Houston, and I won't name this person, but he's much more respected as a reservoir engineer than I am. He totally got analysis wrong on my company with Navidad Resources. He thought my prospect was 160 acres. It ended up being 83,000 acres. So he's just a little bit off. Why was that? Well, it's because I had a different point of view, a different idea of what might work. So I was speculating at that point with a hypothesis. So that's what I'm trying to get across is it's not cut and dried. The presentation that this is sort of like an accounting function, and the innovation doesn't play a role, and risk doesn't play a role, and trial and error doesn't play a role. Well, that's just not how it works. That's not how you find oil and gas.
And do you have any other examples where production has been increased from what under what's proposed would be considered low producing or marginal wells?
Objection is not proper, sir. Rebuttal.
What is he, sir, rebutting, Mr.
I'm just
Swanson?
asking you to follow up on what he just said, Madam Hearing Officer, which is proper, sir, rebuttal.
So you're asking him for another example of what he was saying to Sir rebut Mr. Alexander's testimony?
Correct.
Okay, go ahead.
There's some further evidence. I can give you an example from when I was at Union Pacific Resources and then at Trinity Resources. So at Union Pacific, I was part of a team of engineers. This is when I was in my 20s. That we figured out a way to go re-stimulate wells in the field. So we did a few wells, and then Trinity Resources hired me as engineering manager to work for them. And that was my only job, was to go take old wells, inactive wells or marginal wells that had very little value at that point and apply this technique. Now, why didn't everybody else go do this? Well, they had a different point of view. Also, the way this works is all the other operators, it's like who's going to go skinny dipping, right? You know, somebody's got to jump in first. Everybody else is sitting on the edge of the pool, waiting to see who's going to jump in. And then once they see your results, well, then now they'll put their capital to work. But somebody has to be the pioneer and somebody has to go try it. So what I did in that case is I screened the entire field, 4,300 wells. I wrote a computer program to do this, looked at all the wells that had been stimulated before, and then went in and tried to buy properties. So in that case, a lot of those properties were really poor properties that I think probably would have been forced to have been plugged. There were operators that were sitting on them for a long period of time, and they didn't know what to do with it, and they didn't have the capital to do anything with it. So when you describe the process that, well, an operator's, it's going to be easy to figure all this out. It's like you're calculating your tax return or something. That isn't how it works. It's an iterative process. I can give many examples throughout my whole career of why that's not true. So that would be my comment. That's my only thought about that one topic that Mr. Alexander talked about.
So then how does limiting beneficial use to non-speculative purposes hurt entrepreneurs in the industry?
Madam Hearing Officer. Objection is improper, sir. Rebuttal. He really needs to identify. Otherwise, this sir rebuttal could go on for a long time. He really needs to identify, and you have been very clear in our peer hearing conference and in this hearing, that you need to identify the witness testimony that is being sir rebutted, and other parties have done that throughout this hearing.
Mr. Swanson.
So I think, to some degree that's true, but on the other hand, beneficial use has been covered by every witness. If I need to specify every single witness that touched beneficial use, I'd be talking about every single witness. It's a general question about beneficial use that I think has come up, and it's been in his direct and his rebuttal, and it's a follow-on question to what was already considered to be proper sir rebuttal. I'm just asking him for his opinion on how that can impact speculative purposes, which is a core issue in this proceeding.
Madam Hearing Officer, he's given direct and rebuttal testimony on that, and this is sir rebuttal.
Yeah, I do remember he gave direct and rebuttal testimony on that. I think we've heard from him on that already.
Okay,
He said specifically, it's dark down there and we need time to, for trial and error.
very good. All right, well, Madam Hearing Officer, at this time, Namoga moves to admit to the record the direct testimony of Mr. McGowan and its Appendix A, the rebuttal testimony of Mr. McGowan and its Appendices A and B, and the demonstrative exhibit used for the summary of his direct examination.
Okay, I'll pause for a moment in the event there are objections. They're admitted. Thank you.
And at this time, I make the witness available for cross-examination.
All right. I imagine he might draw some. Should we take a short break before you begin? Let's just take 10 minutes, come back at 10:05.
Okay. Well, I'm not a lawyer. Yeah. I'm not a lawyer, so there's that. Um,
It's 10:05. Let's come back from the break, please. Mrs. Fox or Mr. Tisdale? Ms. Fox, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Good morning, Commissioners. Mr. Bengowan, my name is Tanis Fox. I'm a lawyer with Western Environmental Law Center, and I represent applicants in this proceeding. Do you have a copy of your direct and rebuttal testimony with you?
yes.
Um, On pages 9 through 10 of your direct testimony, you discuss applicants' proposed definition for beneficial purpose and beneficial use, correct?
Yes.
And I brought up that definition on the slide before you. In that testimony, you state, quote, it, referring to the definition of beneficial purpose and beneficial use, also could be interpreted as excluding enhanced oil recovery, EOR projects, geothermal, monitoring, injection, seismic, and other regulatory or reserve management uses, which are effectively excluded. Correct? Is that your testimony?
Yes.
So applicant's proposed definition doesn't exclude monitoring and injection, correct?
I don't think so. I would hope not.
Right. You can see the applicant's proposed definition for beneficial purposes and beneficial use on the slide. And your testimony that says that monitoring injection is excluded from that definition. And it's correct that monitoring and injection are included in applicant's proposed definition, is my question.
Yes, I think that's right. Yes.
Are you not sure that it's right?
No, I'm just, yeah, it looks that I agree with you.
Okay, thank you. In that same testimony, you say that other uses not expressly included in the proposed definition, such as EOR and geothermal, are effectively excluded, correct?
Yes.
Now, other NMOGA witnesses have levied the same criticism, correct? That applicant's proposed definition of beneficial purposes and beneficial use is limiting and excludes such activities as enhance recovery, correct?
I think that's correct. I don't recall what everybody else said necessarily.
So I'm showing you, in addition to the proposed definition for beneficial purposes and beneficial use, the existing definition in the commission's rules for inactive well. Do you see that?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the definition, the existing definition of inactive well in the commission's rules?
Yes.
Now, neither you nor any NMOGA witness has objected to the existing definition of inactive well, correct?
No, don't believe so. Are you talking about the existing definition?
Yes, of inactive well.
Well, again,
You haven't in your testimony objected to that definition, is that correct?
No.
Applicant's expert, Tom Alexander, testified that applicant's proposed definition for beneficial purposes and beneficial use was taken directly from the definition of inactive well. Are you aware of that testimony of Mr. Alexander's?
I don't really remember, but that sounds correct.
And do you see how applicants' proposed definition for beneficial use mirrors the language from the definition of inactive well, in that it gives the same examples of beneficial use, which are production, injection, and monitoring, as in applicants' proposed definition for beneficial purposes and beneficial use?
Yes.
And neither you nor any other NMOGA witness has contended that the existing definition of inactive well limits beneficial purposes of a well to production, injection, and monitoring, correct?
Again, I don't remember what everybody else said.
Let's limit it to your testimony
Okay,
then.
yeah. I'm sorry. Could you ask a question
Yeah.
again? I'm sorry.
You have not contended that the existing definition of inactive well limits beneficial purposes to production, to only production, injection, and monitoring, correct?
No.
Okay, so looking at applicant's proposed definition for beneficial purposes and beneficial use, it, quote, means in an oil or gas well that is being used in a productive or beneficial manner, such as production, injection, or monitoring. In the context of the definition, what do you believe the words such as mean?
Let's see here. Could you run that question by me again? I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Such
Looking
as.
at
Oh,
applicants.
such as. I see it now. I'm sorry. It's in bold. Well, that's a good question because I'm not totally sure. I'd say the only thing that concerns me a little bit is the rest of the sentence there, which is this assumes that you are currently drilling, completing, repairing, or working over. And that's the kind of stuff that that's what I think might be falling under speculative, is that I'm going to do those things.
Looking at the definition, not for inactive well, but for beneficial purposes and beneficial use, what do you think the words such as mean? Do you think that they mean, for example, or including?
Well, they've given three things there, right? Production, injection, monitoring. And then it's actually, I guess, what you would call that? I'm not an English major, but present tense, being drilled, completed, repaired, or worked over.
Right. I'm sorry. We're looking at the definition for beneficial purposes or beneficial use, not inactive well.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
Let's see. Well, they did leave out part of this down here that's I kind of like.
And the
About being
question
drilled.
is,
Say again?
for the third time, what do you think the words such as mean in the definition of beneficial purposes or beneficial use?
I guess it could include other things. Is that what you're driving at?
That is.
Okay. All right.
So it could include other things like EOR and geothermal.
Yes, I think it might. It'd be nice if it said that succinctly, but it'd make it easier to understand.
On page 9 of your direct testimony, you state, I am concerned that defining these terms, again referring to beneficial purposes and beneficial use, now will conflict with their use in other existing OCD regulations, including approved TA under existing 1915-2512 NMAC and the proposed amendments to the same. Is that your testimony?
Yes.
And in your testimony, you cite to a possible conflict in the use of the terms in existing 1915-2512 NMAC and the amendments applicants proposed there too, correct?
Yes.
And in your testimony, you don't cite to any other provisions in the commission rules where there might be a potential conflict, correct?
No.
Okay, so I brought up the language, or I will bring up the language. Let's see, there we go, that's good enough. I brought up the language from 1915-2512 and part of applicants' proposed amendments to that provision and bolded the use of the term beneficial use. where used. Now, in your testimony, you don't explain how applicants' proposed definition would actually conflict with either of those provisions, do you?
I don't think I directly talk about it. I think, again, I'm not an attorney, and I always have a hard time interpreting all this kind of language, but
I'm just referring to your
I
testimony,
know,
sir.
I'm just trying to explain that where my concern comes in is there's something I don't understand as an operator about how this impacts something else. So that's kind of what I'm referring to is like, just at the end of the day, everybody should make sure that we understand that when you change a term or define a term and use it in a different way, that it doesn't impact something else that you didn't intend.
But my question is that you didn't explain in your testimony when you raised the concern about a conflict, you didn't explain what that conflict would actually be in your testimony.
That's true. I didn't give a specific example.
In your direct testimony on pages 10 through 19, you discuss your opposition to applicants and OCD's proposal to establish rebuttable presumptions of no beneficial use, correct?
Can you go to that? Is that here?
Pages. I don't have pages 10 to 19 of your testimony up.
Okay, let's go ahead.
Okay.
Objection. Can the witness look at his testimony? I think he has it available.
Find it here. Let's see. Any help on what page that might be on?
10 to 19 on your direct.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Ms. Fox, did you say 1019 or 19?
10 to 19.
10 to 19. Thank you.
Okay, it's a lot. Okay. Go ahead.
That's why it's not up on the screen.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. The threshold for a preliminary determination that a well presumptively has no beneficial use is one that's producing less than 90 BOE and less than 90 days in a 12-month period, correct?
Correct.
Yesterday, you testified that the presumption is, quote, not based on anything, not geology, end quote, correct?
Yes.
But the presumption is based on production volume and production days, correct?
Yes.
You also said that the definition is not based on a trend line, correct?
Yes.
But it is based on a trend over 12 months in which production is about 1/4 of a barrel of equivalent and producing the well about 1/4 of the time, correct?
I'm not sure if did I say trend line or did I say trend?
You did say trend line in my recollection.
Okay, well, let me explain what I meant by that. That's when I'm thinking of a trend, I mean, what's going on in the field. So if, for example, somebody is having good results with a restimulation program nearby, I would take that into account. I'm not saying that you can't do a decline curve on this well. That would be easy. What's not so easy is to figure out, again, opportunity loss and what you could do with it based on what's going on around you. So what I normally do is I look at statistics about what other people have done in an area, and then I use that. So that's what I was trying to say.
Okay. But you'd agree that the definition is at least looking at a trend over a 12-month period.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. It's you're saying that this well hasn't done very well, but what else is downhole? What else can I do? It doesn't really account for that.
Now, Mr. Purvis's analysis in applicant's exhibit 40 showed that the presumption would apply to approximately 1,700 wells, or 3.7% of all wells, and 0.045% of all production in the state. Do you have any basis to dispute this analysis?
I haven't done my own analysis of this, so no.
And producing 90 BOE means a well that is producing less than 1/4 of 1 barrel of oil equivalent per day over a year, correct?
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
It's 90 BOE is translates into a well producing slightly less than 1/4 of 1 barrel of oil equivalent per day over a year.
I think that's correct, math.
Now, in your direct and rebuttal testimony, you do refer to the June 24th, 2025 report from the New Mexico Legislative Finance Committee on orphan wells, correct?
Yes.
You're familiar with that report?
I haven't reviewed the whole thing, so I do have that factoid out of that report.
You're familiar with it because you cited it in your testimony?
Yes.
So the LFC found on page 4 of its report that for wells producing any volume of oil or gas, the state typically leaves it to the operators to decide when the well should be plugged. In recent years, the average well produced roughly 2 barrels of oil equivalent a day in the year, so that's 12-month period, before it was plugged. Now, I'm not going to ask about any other NOVA witnesses. I'm just going to ask, although I'd
Okay.
like to, but I'm just going to ask you, you are not disputing this LSC finding, correct?
Well, I don't have any way to verify that, but I'm not disputing it.
It looks like, we bring up the chart here, LFC's data source was Enverus for this finding, correct?
Yes.
So the production level that applicants and OCD are proposing to establish a rebuttable, underscore the word rebuttable, presumption of beneficial use is 1/4 of a barrel of oil equivalent, which is significantly less than even the average production of a well in New Mexico during the year before it was plugged, correct?
That sounds right.
On page 19 of your testimony, you raised the concern that information required to rebut a presumption of no beneficial use could require disclosure of confidential and proprietary information. And then you raised the same concern on pages 26 through 28 of your direct testimony regarding information an operator may be required to produce that to show that to prove up that a well should be placed in temporary abandoned status. And again, you raise this concern on page 135 of your direct testimony in connection with information that may be required to submit in the context of a plugging and abandonment plan. Is that correct?
Yes.
And are you familiar that there is a confidentiality provision in New Mexico statute at 7128 that I'm bringing up that applies to the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, which is the state agency within which OCD resides. And that provision requires confidential information submitted by a company to be kept confidential by the agency. And if that information is disclosed, it is a misdemeanor. Are you familiar with that provision?
Yes, but if I could elaborate just a little bit,
Please.
because I've had my information when I have confidentiality agreements with service companies show up in other people's hands, and I've worked on a number of trade secret expert witness cases. So, and normally we would put a guard at the gate, even though everybody on location is supposed to be keeping it confidential, so that information on my wells isn't getting out while I'm drilling. So, I understand that there's a legal precedent here, and they put that in place, and I think that's great. It's just, as an operator, I would be concerned about something that was a closely held trade secret escaping into the public domain.
Have you ever submitted confidential information to OCD and it's been disclosed?
No.
Do you know of any example where that has occurred?
No.
On pages 24 to 29 of your direct testimony, you discuss your opposition to applicants and OCD's proposals in 1915-25 and MAC regarding temporary abandonment, correct? That's pages 24 through 29.
Yes.
Yesterday, I believe you testified that your quote, biggest problem with these provisions is that part 25 is that the operator needs to provide a lot of documentation to substantiate future beneficial use, and additional time for that information showing is needed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you believe that 90 days would be a sufficient amount of time?
Probably.
And what if OCD could grant an extension of time even to the 90 days for good cause?
That would be great.
Okay, so I'm showing you applicants Exhibit 8, which is a graphic of the number of inactive wells from OCD's inactive well list, sorted by the amount of time they have been in inactive status. And the wells in approved temporary abandonment are inactive wells that are included in OCD's inactive well list, correct?
Yes.
As far as have you ever, that OCD's inactive well list includes wells in approved TA, correct?
Yes.
So you'll see here that approximately 1,150 wells have been in inactive status more than 8 years. Almost 900 have been in inactive status more than 10 years, and 100 have been in inactive status more than 25 years, correct?
Yes.
And you don't have any basis to dispute this analysis, do you?
No.
And so LFC made similar findings in Table 9 on page 19 of its report, that almost 50 wells had been inactive for up to 40 years, correct?
Yes.
And you don't have a basis to dispute this analysis, do you?
No.
So Applicants Exhibit 7 is a compilation of data on inactive, approved TA, and expired TA wells taken from OCD's inactive well list on July 3rd of this year. And on that day, the Environmental Defense Fund data manager who collected the data found that 3,765 wells that there were 3,765 wells on the inactive well list. And she found a surprisingly high number of those wells were out of compliance with Part 25 of the Commission's rules, because the inactive wells had never gone into TA status, or had been approved for TA status, but the TA status had expired and had not entered into any kind of an agreed compliance order with OCD. So she found that 3,234 wells out of 3,700 or so, or 86% of the wells on the inactive list were out of compliance. And you don't have a basis to dispute that this analysis, do
No.
you? So assuming this analysis is correct, in your opinion, is 86% non-compliance rate for inactive wells a high rate of compliance, in non-compliance?
I would say that that is high, but I have to admit, when I look at that list, I also think, well, what if 10% of those 300 some odd were wells that I could do something with? I'd hate to see them plugged before I got a chance to do something with them. So that's, again, I'm trying to bring out from an operator's perspective of there's also an opportunity set within that, but obviously that is they're out of compliance.
Right. And so if an operator wanted to take advantage of that opportunity, they should do so by following the rules.
Whatever the rules are, they should follow them.
No, I get you're a rule follower.
Sorry?
I get that you're a rule follower.
My wife might debate that, but
LFC makes a similar finding on page 18 of its report, finding that, quote, virtually all wells on the inactive list are eligible for enforcement action. And you don't have a basis to dispute this finding, do you?
no.
So I understand that you oppose applicants and OCD's proposals in 1915-25 to require a showing of beneficial use for wells to be placed in TA status, and our proposed limitation within which wells may be placed in TA. But NMOGA or you haven't proposed any regulatory solutions to these identified problems with active wells remaining in inactive status and out of compliance over long periods. Have you?
No, but I think everybody needs to work together to figure that out. I will agree with that. That's an issue that needs to be addressed. So don't get me wrong. I'm never saying that it's not a problem that needs to be addressed. I didn't feel like I was in a position to negotiate on behalf of NMOGA, but I was just trying to give my take on it as an operator.
You said in your testimony that you have a lot of ideas, I think, for proposals, but that was not within your scope of work to undertake, correct?
Yeah, I'm just kind of general, ideas, but as I've listened to,
That was your testimony, correct?
yeah, that's right. What I put in the report was I have some general things I recommended, but since I listened to all the testimony from everybody and kind of get a better feel for the scope of the problem and everybody's viewpoints on it, I have thought of a lot of things that, if anybody asked me, I might be willing to share. So.
Well, and are you aware of the requirements in this proceeding that Ms. Morgan alluded to yesterday? And that is, if parties had specific proposals, that they were supposed to present those specific proposals along with their direct or rebuttal testimony. Are you aware of that requirement?
Completely ignorant of all the legal stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we've agreed. You're not a lawyer. I'm not an engineer.
Exactly.
In your direct testimony on pages 41 through 45, you discuss your opposition to combining the terms approved temporary abandonment, and temporarily abandoned status, correct?
Yes.
And let me pull up those various definitions. So the current definition for approved temporary abandonment means a well that is inactive and has been approved for TA in accordance with the commission's rules and complies with the relevant rules, correct? That's the first definition.
At the top there,
Yeah,
yes.
and the red underline is our proposed change, and the black is what the existing rule is.
Yes.
And if you look at the current definition of temporary abandon, which is the X'd out language, second on the screen, it means, quote, the status of a well that is inactive, correct?
Yes, that's how I would normally have thought of that term as an industry term.
Okay. And I've also pulled up the definition just for your information for inactive well again. So is it in your view then, are the terms temporary abandonment and temporarily abandoned status synonymous with the term inactive well? Do they mean exactly the same thing?
Well, no, this is where legalese and oil field vernacular maybe conflict is.
Again, I'm just looking at your testimony about these definitions and what they mean.
Yes,
Okay, it's your
Yep.
testimony.
right.
Go on.
I'm just trying to explain.
Okay.
Okay, so this is what's confusing to me. It says temporary abandonment, but that's the same as approved temporary abandonment. I think that's what they're trying to say. So I don't understand how, like I can inside my company, I can say, I'm going to temporarily abandon this well. Like let's stop work on it. We're not going to produce the well and I'm not going to do anything to it right now. I'm holding it and I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do with it. But I don't see how that's the same thing as approved temporary abandonment. That was part of my confusion about how that is worded.
From an operational perspective, but looking at the rules, my question is, can you point to where in the commission's rules where the terms for temporary abandonment and temporarily abandoned status are not used when referring to a well that's been an approved temporary abandonment status? So can you point to a place in the rules where there actually is a conflict?
I'm probably not good enough to do that. Yeah.
And you didn't do that in your testimony, did you?
No.
On pages 42 through 45 of your direct testimony, you discuss your opposition to applicant's proposed definition for expired temporary abandonment and expired temporary abandonment status, correct? That's 42 through 45.
Yes.
On page 43, you argue, I believe again, that the proposed definition for temporary for expired temporary abandonment and expired temporary abandonment status may conflict with use of these terms in existing rules, correct?
I thought it is possible that it might conflict. And then I also thought that it says expired, but it could be that you have a mechanical problem. That's not really an expiration. That's just that's a different issue, right? So if you've got, if it was past the time limit, that would make sense to me that it's an expired temporary abandonment. But if it's just, we discovered I've got a leak, well, that's more like that there should be some other category, maybe. I don't know. But if you see what I'm getting at, that just reading it as an operator, I found that confusing. And then also, I don't understand the rules maybe well enough to figure out whether it's going to conflict with something or not.
Well, there's no existing definition for expired TA in the rules, so there couldn't be a conflict with existing rules, correct?
Well, as far as I know.
Right, but you said in your testimony that you thought there was a conflict between the proposed definition and the existing rules. So I'm just clarifying that
Correct.
couldn't be possible because there's no.
You're making a good point.
Thank you.
that I've struggled to try to understand what all this means. There's a reason why I'm not an attorney, but yeah, you're making a good point.
On page 3 of your rebuttal testimony, you state that the LFC estimate of the number of orphan wells should be relied upon to calculate the number of orphan wells in New Mexico, correct? That's page 3 of your rebuttal. Accordingly, I concur with Mr. Arthur's recommendation that all analyses relying on the MOS as a measure of the orphan well population should be recalculated using LFC's figure.
Is
Does that
that
sound
what's on the
familiar?
slide here, or is that something else?
That is on page 3 of your rebuttal testimony. Lines 57 through 66.
I'm sorry. Could you ask the question again?
Sure.
I'm at that.
Yeah, no. On page 3 of your rebuttal, you state that the LFC estimate of the number of wells orphan wells that should be relied upon to calculate the number of orphan wells in New Mexico should be the LFC estimate. Specifically, you say, accordingly, I concur with Mr. Arthur's recommendation that all analyses relying on the MOS as a measure of the orphan well population should be recalculated using the LFC's figure. It's within lines 57 to 66.
Okay. Am I on the right page? I'm sorry. Page 3 and 4.
Page 3 of your rebuttal I have.
This is for, I've got it.
I could have
And then
gotten
what
it
line
wrong.
number?
It's between lines 57 and 66.
57. I'm sorry.
Uh,
I thought
and
it
that's
said
okay.
57.
It's a lot of words. Essentially, you're saying that LFC's estimate of orphan wells should be relied upon.
I think that's what I said. Yes.
Have you found it? If you want to find it, that's fine.
Um,
And if I got the,
see where it says that. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Here it's 65, 66, I guess. Should
Right.
be using LFC's figure, only then commission.
correct.
That is what I said in the report. Yes.
Yeah, and then above on lines 57 to 58, you say the LFC report reflects this definition and places the number of orphan wells in New Mexico at approximately 700, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so then in your opinion, should the commission also rely on LFC's estimates for the number of wells at risk for abandonment, which include 1,400 inactive wells for which OCD has not pursued plugging authority and approximately 3,000 low producing wells at risk of being orphaned? I'm showing LFC's
Right.
findings on this slide.
Well,
for
I
you.
guess since there's been some changes in the calculations that I've understood, if I had my druthers, I would, if you asked me to do it, I would do it all over again and then try to make sure I understood what was right. So I haven't done enough analysis, I think, to give you a good answer based on what I know right now. Obviously, there's a lot of wells that are orphaned, and somebody needs to do something about it, and the industry needs to pay for it. But I would hesitate to say I know exactly what that number is.
Do you know of any better estimate than what the LFC has provided in its report that I'm showing you?
I don't at this time, no.
And in your opinion, should you rely on the LFC's estimate for the state's current and near future liability for well plugging and site remediation, which is between $700 million and $1.6 billion?
If you're asking an engineer if I'm going to rely on all this, I would say I would do it. I'd have to do it all over again. I'd have to make sure I understood how everybody did their sorting. And now, obviously, these are big numbers, and I know it's going to be a big number. So, but I can't say for sure what numbers you guys should be using.
You didn't run your own numbers, is what you're saying.
That's correct.
Do you know how much funding was in the state's reclamation fund as of April 2025, according to LFC?
I don't recall the exact number, but I don't think it was enough.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's about
Yes.
$67 million. So on pages 69 through 90 of your direct testimony, you discuss your opposition to applicant and OCD's proposals to increase financial assurance, correct?
Correct.
But you haven't proposed any specific increases to the current financial assurance requirements to address the state's current and near future liability for well plugging and site remediation.
All I've discussed, I did discuss that in some of my answers, which is, again, as an engineer, I would like to see something that's based on what we know about what causes wells to degrade and come up with a system. It's the kind of thing engineers enjoy doing. It may complicate things, but I would use hardcore statistics. I would be thinking about all these factors and then try to use that methodology to target the wells that are the biggest problems. And they would need the biggest bonding, but I'm not sure exactly what the numbers should be.
But in this proceeding that was filed well over a year ago, you have not proposed, and NMOGA has not proposed, any increases in financial assurance to address the potential liability, which you acknowledge is very large.
I don't know what NMOGA has proposed, but I have not proposed that.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr.
Thank you.
McGowan.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Mr. Tremaine or Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Good morning, Mr. McGowan.
Good morning.
Okay, just kind of a roadmap here. You put out some kind of high-level conclusions or descriptions in your testimony, which you rely upon in making your recommendations or ultimately later on the conclusions. So I just want to set the stage that I want to kind of drill down into some of those, and I can give you some citations, but this is not an exercise in quizzing you on like what you said on page 1 of 137 or anything like that. I want to, it's not about, it's not about her. I'm just trying to set the stage that I want to talk about some general concepts and like drill down, because you've outlined a lot of experience here that I think is going to be really important for ours and the commission's understanding. So I'm also from the Midwest, and so I love idioms, and you were kind of cracking me up. The statement at the end that the reason I'm not an attorney, that one got me. Is that you're wise? You were smarter than that? Is that what you're saying?
Well, maybe numbers are my friend. Words may not be. So,
all right. Well, at the beginning of your testimony, you talk about, I believe you use the word speculation here, but you're talking about the capital stage of development. So there's a stage where an operator is, and you as an operator were raising capital for a development. Is that fair?
yes.
Okay. So when you are starting a project like that, at that stage, are you as an operator factoring in end of life decommissioning costs?
Yes.
Okay.
Everybody asks about that.
Yeah. And how, when you are putting together one of these projects, how are you accounting for decommissioning costs?
Well, when you do engineering economic analysis, you need to come up with an estimate of what you think it's going to cost to plug the well. And you put that in as one of your negative cash flows in your projection. That's just standard practice.
So you talked about redevelopment of fields. So the potential of taking, we're going to call generally, again, it's not a quiz on the 1,180, but you have marginal wells, however you're defining them, and you want to redevelop the area. Do you have to make an assessment of what it's going to take to plug and reclaim the surface associated with each of those marginal wells?
Yes.
Okay. Have you articulated in your experience what plugging costs for the companies that you've managed have been?
Well, it is well specific and area specific.
Mhm.
So I think I've talked about in the report, like these numbers look like they might be similar to Texas. Of course, I'm working in Texas, not New Mexico. What I would do if I was doing engineering economic analysis, I would go to my completion engineer or my drilling engineer, and we would develop an authorization for expenditure. We would call vendors. We would have a procedure. We'd figure out how many days it was going to take. And then we would also put a contingency on top of that for what inevitably something's going to go wrong, which is often. So you put some sort of risk factor on that, and then use that in your economics. And then, of course, when you're putting the project together in the first place, particularly if you're talking to private equity, they're going to want to know, well, is there any liabilities out here I need to know about? Well, yeah, there's a bunch of wells out here that we don't know what to do with that we want to plug. They're going to want you to, you got to put all that in your economic analysis.
So you can get a projection or even an estimate of those plugging costs and incorporate that. Is that fair?
Yeah, you have to estimate plugging cost. Yes.
Okay. You referred to your development activities. I believe the phrase on page 2 of your testimony was that you executed full cycle acquisition, development, divestiture, and decommissioning programs, including plugging and abandonment, P&A, and surface restoration activities. So that's kind of the topic that I'm referring to here.
Yes.
And I think it's fair to say that the hot button topic in this hearing is focused on the divestment and the decommissioning aspect of that. So
yes.
Zooming out for just a second, I believe you referenced 3 companies that that you had acted as a CEO of, all Navidad entities. Roughly, how many wells have these companies for which you were the CEO spud and completed?
I'm thinking it's going to be about 60, probably, no more than that, actually, because there's Navidad Resources Inc. And we drilled wells with a company called Newman Production Company. In that case, we were the engineering department and they were the operator. So I've actually forgotten how many wells we drilled, but those were Freestone County, Cotton Valley Lime, Cotton Valley Sand, Travis Peak in East Texas. That was when gas was going to go through the roof. And then we actually took this acreage that became the basis of the next company. So at the next company, I think we drilled about 50 wells. And then we had Navidad Resources LLC. We only drilled 10, but those were $20 million a piece. So they were quite a bit more expensive.
Those were big horizontal wells.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And were those all projects where you were taking over lower producing wells, holding acreage, and then with those wells and then redeveloping? Actually, most of that work I did was in my early part of my career when I started at Union Pacific Resources and then at Trinity Resources. I did more of that kind of work there. And then we did end up with a few wellbores that we picked up. For example, at Navidad Resources LLC, there was a 15,000 acre lease that was held by the state of Texas. And there was one well that was a well that was on its last legs, but it was effectively holding the lease. The primary term was going to fall out, and that well was only going to hold, I think, 160 acres. Oh. So there was a 15,000 acre lease. So I bought that well from an operator, a bigger operator, who didn't see the value in it. I bought that well for $500,000 with the 15,000 acres. And then I got the state of Texas to give us a continuous drilling clause. And we went in and did our completion treatment on that well, which involved water fracking about 6 different zones and commingling a gas zone with an oil zone. Put that on production, and we proved up that block. And then we subsequently drilled. This is a good example of that was a horrible well that anybody else would have plugged. But we took it. That actually was the thing that proved up the sweet spot of the whole company. And we ended up making one well we drilled in there was like a 1 million barrel well. Okay. But we were using a different technique. So now I did have wells I had to plug. And I had wells I tried to re-enter that were plugged that I then had to plug. So let me interject for a second, because that's really useful information. But what I'm kind of getting at here is I want to know, like, how many lower producing wells. So you talked about drilling these various wells in these development projects. How many lower producing wells roughly have your companies taken on?
Let's see. Again, that's all I did at UPRC and at Trinity. And I did some drilling at both of those too. But in those 3 companies, let's see, we had 1, 2, I think it was only like a handful. So that wasn't my primary. What was driving that was the private equity guys wanted us to lease and drill. So that's what we did.
The mineral rights and the acreage are what's valuable in that kind of deal, right? You need to be able to hold it, but it's going to be the horizontal well that's going to be productive in the redevelopment plan.
There is the sad story is that after we went in and proved up this commingle technique and the new frac, some guys went and bought the package to the north of us that my private equity guys wouldn't let me buy. And they just backed up and did our frac on a bunch of marginal wells, and they sold it for $715 million. So,
all right.
So that's why I drove a used pickup over here, and they have jets, I guess. But yeah,
fair. They invested at the wrong time.
Yeah.
But you already answered my other question, which was, but I'll just ask you to confirm that. In those examples you provided, you then went into those marginal wells, you worked over, recompleted, did some other maintenance work, and either, brought a well back online or improved its production. Is that fair?
Ask me that one more time. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So you had just given us an example of all the things you did to that single well that you bought and how you improved its production. So I'm just asking you to confirm that in this example, you're getting these marginal wells. In a lot of cases, you're doing workovers or recompletions or some other work on the well.
That's the point. That's what you're looking for. And where somebody else sees a marginal well, I see about $4 or $5 million it took to put that hole in the ground that I don't want to have to spend again.
Okay. So we've talked about a bunch of these wells, kind of like mid-cycle actions. What percentage, again, roughly, of all the wells we've talked about, what percentage of those wells have your companies plugged and abandoned?
That was a small percentage because we were drilling new wells. I did have to plug I had one package where we had acreage we bought, and we got to the end of the private equity cycle, and they were ready to sell, and so I never got to do anything with it. So that well was in Navarro County, and then there was a well in Madison County that I was in the middle of drilling it, and oil prices dropped, and they made me lay the rig down, and it was sitting over there and hadn't been finished, and should have been, but wasn't. Let's see, and then there was trying to think if there was any other ones. That was at Navidad Resources LLC. At the current company that we just sold the assets of, that was all new drilling.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
And then let me back up a sec, but in my new project I'm working on is going to involve solely re-entering old wells.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And that's
in the future.
That's a project that's for you. Okay. So it sounds like the majority of the wells that we talked about, whether they were new wells you drilled or lower producing wells that you worked on, your companies ultimately sold most of those wells to other companies prior to plugging and abandonment.
We did, yes.
Okay.
And just to elaborate on that, we carved out the wells that had to be plugged and they didn't buy any of those. And then, and unfortunately, I had all the employees went with the asset, and I was the only one left, and so I had to get my coveralls and go out and plug those wells.
Okay. Those are the few examples that
right. So that's how we handled it. Is I made sure they were plugged correctly.
Okay. All right. When you were talking about the specific mechanism, I know when you're talking about the capital stage, you were saying that you have to get projections or estimates and incorporate that in to get the equity backing. And that I'm referring to is the decommissioning costs. But in terms of actual operations, while you're managing one of these projects, how are you accounting for those eventual decommissioning costs? Are you saving money from the production of the new wells? Are you relying upon production revenue from new wells that's happening later to plug wells in real time? Or what's the actual mechanism there? Do you understand my question?
Well, you should always make sure you have enough capital on hand to take care of all your obligations. So
you're essentially reserving funds through the operation while you have enough revenue to plug the wells and holding that for decommissioning costs. Is that fair?
That's what a prudent operator should do.
Completely agree with you. Thank you. You mentioned a phrase in your testimony. I don't have a citation to it, but you said you referred to one of the sales as de-risk the position. Do you recall that?
Yes, and that has a specific meaning.
It's a term of art in industry, right?
Yeah,
I'm
what
gonna ask
what
you
you're
to explain what
de-risking
it is.
is whether your idea that you came up with was going to work or not. So you're not de-risking something to do with plugging. You're de-risking. Is this a viable economic project? You know, are the hydrocarbons there? If I spend this money, am I going to get a sufficient rate of return on that investment? So that's the term of art, is you're de-risking basically a concept.
Okay. Is selling wells before you have to pay for their plugging liability a part of de-risking?
Selling. I'm sorry, I'm not following.
Is divesting of assets before you have to pay for decommissioning costs, is that a part of de-risking?
No, I've never done that. That's not what that term means to me,
Okay.
right? I'm talking about really you're trying to figure out whether, you know, am I going to make any money on this project or not? Now, maybe what you're talking about would be what people might call rationalizing your portfolio, right? So that's a different term of art, I think.
And rationalizing your portfolio, thank you for that clarification. So if you rationalize your portfolio as part of that divesting of assets before you have to pay for decommissioning? Okay.
Yeah, and that's funny because my example of my little well that I got that kind of made the company, that was a big outfit with lots of smart people who rationalized their portfolio. So I got to have a little laugh at their expense.
Didn't work out in that case, did it? So if I'm worried that my old Nissan Xterra is getting up there in miles and I'm about to have a bunch of maintenance costs, significant maintenance costs, and I sell it before I do that, is that a reasonable analogy for rationalizing my portfolio?
Well, I would think so, but whoever buys it should take into account what they're buying and that it comes with its own set of problems.
Yeah. I mean, after I sell it, it's their problem. So, I mean, would you agree with that?
I'm trying to think about that. I guess that sort of depends on there's some legal issues there, maybe.
I can't hide the problems from them when I
Right,
sell it,
but
right?
do you still own an environmental liability, for example?
Right.
Because normally in a purchase and sale agreement, they'll write into the contract, "Oh, I'm not buying your environmental liability that you created before I took over this well." That's a normal clause you see in a purchase
Normal
and sale agreement.
indemnification. Right.
Is you told me it was clean when I bought it.
Mhm.
Getting an as is where is a little hard.
Fair enough. Fair enough. When you sell wells, what happens? So you as a prudent operator, your Navidad entities you've talked about, you're saving money for any decommissioning costs that you're projecting, but then you sell the wells. So what happens to the resources that you had held allocated to the decommissioning costs of those wells once you sell them?
Well, I mean, the cash that I have stays with me and gets distributed to the investors, and it's the new guy's problem.
Okay.
If I'm answering your question.
Pardon, sorry, Frog. Yes, you absolutely are. So when you think here for a second, I might come back to this. Let me ask you about, you referred to yesterday in your slide 37. Actually strike that. I want to stay there. You talk about in your testimony and Moga's presentation generally talks about risk-based approach to financial assurance, right?
Yes.
Can we agree in the room that risk-based strategy is appropriate?
Yes, but I don't think we've actually identified what that exactly means yet.
Right. I respect that the parties don't agree that the current petition is appropriately risk-based, but I want to ask you about portfolios. So you've managed several oil and gas well portfolios and large projects. When you have, you're preparing estimates and projections and risk assessments for equity backers, et cetera. We've talked about that. If you said, hey, equity, I want an investment because I want to go buy 50 wells that produce 500 to 1,500 BOE per year, and I just want to operate those wells. Would you get equity backing for that plan?
Well, the industry has shifted a bit in that respect recently. I think it depends on the strategy of the equity backer. Some folks are going after just long-term reserves and are buying properties like that. Other folks want you to be able to do additional development. So I guess I would say right now, the whole PE model is in flux at the moment, right? Because of all these things that have happened. So I would say that there's some folks that might buy that property and be willing to put money into it, and it would be more of almost like a limited partnership. You would buy it, and then you would have to produce those wells, and then distribute revenue to the investors. But in that case, you better take into account that you have to plug some of those wells.
Okay. So hypothetical here, if you have a portfolio that has 50 wells that all produce 750 BOE on an annual basis.
Is that cumulative or for a piece?
A piece. Thank you. Yes. So each well, I'm trying to make this simple. I'm lawyer math. So you have 50 wells. All of the wells are what would fall under the proposed definition of marginal well in this petition. All right. So they all are producing magically 750 barrels of oil equivalent per year. And then you have a second portfolio where you have 25 wells that are in that situation. And then you have additional wells that are new horizontal wells producing. Which of those portfolios, in your professional opinion, is of higher risk?
Okay, so let's think about that for a minute. Here's part of the problem is when you buy wells, whoever's selling it is trying to get a rate of return, and whoever's buying it is trying to get a rate of return. So what's the risk involved in the new wells? Well, the new wells is how early in the process am I? If it's, let's just say most of the wells have 3 to 6 months production versus if they've got 5 years production. So I have an unreliable decline curve. You're still in transient flow during that early period, and you don't really know where the curve's going to break over. So I've seen folks get burned on that, where they thought, oh yeah, I've got all these reserves, and then they buy it and they find out 3 years later it went into the toilet on them. So that's a separate issue, right? I think most private equity groups and investors would think, well, I've got a big asset base here, and that's probably the lower risk. Unless, on the other side, do I have something I'm going to go do with all those marginal wells that I already know? For example, if I know that I've been able to do this particular treatment in that same field, and it's working like gangbusters, and I can buy all those, I'm probably not going to want to have to deal with the bid-ask problem with that big package. I'll probably go buy I have much less capital exposure. I can get the whole thing for cheap and then go apply my technique and bring all the wells production up. My rate of return could be much higher. So there's a risk versus reward issue, if you will. Yeah. So I understand your hypothetical. I'm not sure what you're driving at, but I'm trying to answer the question.
Sure. Well, so you would expect the portfolio that has a newer horizontal well to produce more revenue, right?
But you're also going to pay for that cash flow stream
when you buy it, right?
When you buy it.
Right. But your response to my hypothetical was that what you would do is in either case, you would seek to improve or redevelop those, right? That's the example you provided in response. You can
Yeah.
buy the marginal well portfolio for cheaper, but what you're going to do is you're going to redevelop it.
That's my approach has always been, I want to know that I've got some sort of upside potential beyond what I paid for it. Otherwise, why did I buy it? So
Have you ever in your professional experience, well, strike that. I'm going to move on. I want to ask you about some of your references that you made to corrosion. So in slide 37 yesterday, during your direct, you talked about, I believe what you said was, I'm paraphrasing, rust, cement, essentially corrosion is what kills wells. Is that fair?
yeah, the cement doesn't corrode, but
It can degrade.
well, probably not. If you had good cement to start with, it sometimes it'll actually get harder, and you can get barite settling. I've discovered the hard way that makes a really good sealant. So as the barite settles out of the drilling mud, that can pack off above your cement and make a really good seal.
Let me back up because I don't want to misquote you. I thought you said cement. I might be wrong. I was taking notes on the fly, but
I didn't want to imply that cement corrodes. Put it that way.
Fair.
Corrosion
Yeah.
is a metallurgical term.
I believe that the part that I'm highlighting here is that you said that corrosion is what kills wells. Yeah.
Yeah, what you should be worried about is where you have corrosive fluids in contact with steel.
Okay. And then you had indicated, I think on that slide or the series of slides, a number of kind of elements that can cause or increase corrosion. What I want to ask you is time one of the functions that can contribute to corrosion?
Well, time doesn't drive corrosion, but corrosion is a time-dependent process.
Better way to put it. That's why lawyers ask engineers questions. If you leave a well unplugged for years and you don't perform any work on that well, that could increase the risk of corrosion to the well, correct?
If you leave it abandoned and you put a corrosion inhibited fluid inside the well bore, you can essentially pickle the inside of the well bore. What corrosion is it's actually like a battery. It's an ion exchange. So if you can put a film of something on the surface of the metal that stops ion exchange, you kill the corrosion. So that's internal corrosion.
Thank you, sir. But that's not what I asked you. What I asked you was if you leave it alone. I understand that like a prudent operator can do things to prevent corrosion. And OCD might even require those things in certain circumstances. But I'm asking you, if you just leave it alone, time contributing to corrosion, if you leave it alone for 5 years, you could have worse corrosion than if you leave it alone for, 5 weeks.
Exactly. That's
Okay.
true.
So regarding plugging, you provided some testimony regarding plugging, and you stated, I think, consistent with your testimony today, that that certain plugging aspects of plugging depend on corrosion and metallurgy of the well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so a well, we've agreed, can be exposed to corrosive environments, right?
Yes.
Okay, and the well can be exposed to corrosive environments regardless of its plugging status, right?
Yes.
We've talked a bunch about temporary abandonment and approved temporary abandonment. Is it your understanding, is it consistent with your understanding that in New Mexico, under the current rules, once a well is tested and put in approved temporary abandonment, that well does not require additional downhole monitoring for another 5 years?
Well,
I'm just asking you about the status of when testing.
downhole monitoring. I mean, actually, what you're monitoring is at the surface.
Okay. And so that abandoned TA well, that is going to be potentially subjected to the same corrosive environment as any other well, correct?
Well, again, did you pickle it when you plugged it, or did you?
I'm asking you about
abandon it, or
I'm asking you about the environment and the exposure of the well bore, the casing, the tubing, what have you, not what did the operator do?
no? I guess I'm. Well, that is the environment, I guess, though, right? Is the fluids are the electrolyte. So that's inside the wellbore. So if you, I'm sure if I follow the question, I'm sorry.
Okay. Could a caliper log encasing inspection, because you referenced this in your testimony, could a caliper log encasing inspection identify potential corrosion that does not constitute a complete failure at the time of the inspection?
It could, and I think the issue I got there is what's your criteria to determine when you have something that you have to do something about. With a pressure test, it's really obvious. If you see a leak, obviously you know you have a problem. So I've never really used those tools for that purpose. I've always used them for, if I see a leak of some kind, I go in and I use those tools to figure out where the leak is. Like, why do I have a problem? So I've seen them used as a diagnostic tool. And something else I've seen is that folks will gather a lot of data sometimes and then they don't do anything with it. So if you're going to require logging, we ought to know what are you going to do with it and what's the criteria. And then the other problem is all these different tools can be interpreted differently. There's an interpretation that's required. So you just seem like the rule's a little bit vague on all that to me.
I understand your position. Thank you. Did you hear the testimony of Lauren Deedy?
I don't think so.
Okay, I'll move on anyway. I want to move on and ask you, you've talked about this concept of a bad actor, and I kind of want to examine that a little bit. I think that bad actors are absolutely a concern for everyone, but it like talking about the beneficial use definition, it's not really defined. So when you talk about an oil and gas operator who's a bad actor, what does that mean to you?
Well, if you look at my CV, I spent 5 years doing environmental auditing for clients and doing spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plans. And then I did about 500 different surface facilities where people were buying and selling wells. So I got to see a wide variety of operating characteristics. So, for example, an Exxon location, you could basically eat off the pad if you wanted to, and it would be fine. They even had all their piping color coded by the fluid that was in it. And then there were other operators. This would be a good example of his stuffing box leaks on his pump jack, and he digs a trench and it goes into the creek, and the oil's going down in the creek. So this is the version. That guy's a bad operator.
Okay. So when you talk about bad actors, it sounds like you're talking about intentional malfeasance.
I don't know if it's intentional. It can be incompetence. It can be ignorance. It can be laziness.
You're getting to my next question. So do you include negligence and incompetence in bad actor, your definition of a bad actor?
Well, I know
Objection, this calls for a legal.
Yeah, I know those are legal terms, but
bad actor is not a defined legal term.
Well, negligence is.
I'll
So-
move on. He already testified to this fact. I was just trying to clarify.
Thank you.
If an operator is operating a portfolio, so you've talked about decommissioning costs and reserving costs. If an operator, however they acquired it, acquires a portfolio of wells and they do not have the funds or the revenue to decommission those wells, they're clearly and patently undercapitalized. Is that a bad actor?
I don't know if it's a bad actor. I mean, they haven't done anything wrong yet, but they might.
In that situation, is that portfolio at a higher risk of orphaning?
I would say yes. If you've got somebody that, if you get, I don't know how you figure out if they don't have any intention of properly abandoning their wells or not, but, or if they're going to raise capital going forward. I don't know,
Okay, thank you. You talked about I'm wrapping up here. We're very close. So you talked about some issues with the OCDs or the Welk's proposal for beneficial use, presumption of no beneficial use, and the 30-day period to provide a response. Do you recall that generally?
Yes.
Madam Hearing Officer, I'd like to share my screen real briefly here. So I'm going to point you to, this is always dangerous because I'm using someone else's exhibit, but I'm going to point you to petitioner's exhibit, Bates number 32, Exhibit 1E. So I just want to confirm with you that beneficial purposes is, so for the understanding, like, right, this is the red line proposal. You stated you're not a lawyer. The black is the existing rule text and the red are the proposed changes. So would you agree that a determination that a well is no longer usable for beneficial purposes already exists in the current rule?
Yes.
Okay. You testified to some length about the concern, which that even though you're not applying a legal analysis or determination to this, as an operator, you want to be clear on what the rule means, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if OCD were under its existing rule to tell you as an operator that there was a determination of no beneficial use for one of your wells, which we can already do, what would that mean to you? How would you know what that means under current rule?
Well, I guess it means in their opinion, I don't have anything else I can do with that well bore. I need to plug it.
And would you agree with me if I stated that there is not a clear provision in the current rule for you to respond to that determination?
I guess that's true. Yeah, that sounds correct.
If beneficial use is not defined in the current rule and OCD were to issue a determination of no beneficial use, wouldn't you think that that would be of concern to operators?
Yeah, I think there needs to be, what I'm trying to think about here is, like as an operator, what would I like to see? I'd like to see some way to have a little bit of grace to make your argument and have enough time to put together your argument. I don't see anything in here that suggests everything is well-centric. So that's, how do I explain my program? Like if I had like I've talked about, right? So that I have all these candidate wells left to go do something to. So I guess I'm not saying you shouldn't have some sort of improvement in the way this is all written and that they make it clearer and the definitions are more obvious. The operator needs enough time to figure out how to make that argument. Sometimes you have partners and you got to get them on board with what you're going to do. So all these things take time. And I'm not sure that there's something about it that bothers me, which is that I could just see that the projects I would think of might be rejected out of hand because I don't have enough data. So at the time that I make the proposal.
So let me ask you this to your response. So in the situations that you outlined, so Navidad put together, the various entities put together proposals, you got equity backing. In that situation, you would be able to come to the division and say, yes, this well is producing a small amount, but here's this other additional information. I've got $500 million in equity backing. We have already planned for decommissioning costs. We've already done site assessments for environmental remediation, et cetera, et cetera. That's something that if you're at any stage of your redevelopment plan, you are going to have that information available, right?
Yeah, that's correct. But then a bunch of my wells are already might already be in this other category. So it seems like this could be done better, put it that way, that there ought to be a way to do this so that I'd have some assurance that all my target wells aren't going to get thrown out. And then there could be something completely arbitrary, or the engineer on the other side at the OCD just thinks I'm crazy. It wouldn't be the first time. So, I don't know how you solve that problem exactly, but that's all I'm bringing to the table is just think about that. Think about that when you're working through this.
So all the things that we just talked about, all those examples, isn't it fair to say that OCD in its recommendation and the petitioner in adopting this recommendation incorporated all the types of planning and capitalization documentation as specific examples of what an operator can provide in this proposal to rebut the presumption of no beneficial use?
Well, they mentioned a lot of data that you could dump, but it's for that particular well. So let's just say that, again, in my example of the thing I kind of want to go do in Texas, that nobody's done before, I've got to convince somebody that I don't know who it is, that this idea I have that nobody else has had or executed yet. I heard some discussion about the PRMS, the Petroleum Resource Management System. I think some of these ideas would be contingent reserves, particularly, or maybe possible reserves under that. So that means that, contingent's like 5% or less probability of success. Possible is going to be, 10% probability of success. So what's the hurdle? That's what I'm trying to understand. There's no indication of what the hurdle might be, and how open the commission might be to accepting some of those kind of things.
If I represented to you that it was Mr. Powell's testimony and position that the division specifically structured this to allow for the type of information you're talking about, a back and forth with operators, and would encourage redevelopment plans, is that something that would assuage any of your concerns?
I don't know whether to completely alleviate it, because I don't know how that's all going to turn out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uncertainties that you're a planner. Thank you. Mr. McGowan, I really appreciate the dialogue this morning. I think it was helpful, and I pass the witness.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tremaine. Mr. Moore, do you have, Mr. Grazer for the State Land Office?
Yes, thank you. I'm filling in for Mr. Moore, so I appreciate everyone's patience while I kind of muddle through this a bit. I'm not too familiar with the record. Mr. McGowan, in your direct, I believe towards the end of the direct, you were discussing paying quantities. Do you have a formula or a method by which you suggest measuring paying quantities?
Well, that's always a big debate, because that comes under many mineral leases. We'll use that term, right? So, and I've been on some expert witness cases where you have to talk about that. So, in my mind, obviously, it means that you're making, revenues must exceed expenses over some time frame. The difficulty gets to be like, what time frame are we talking about? So yeah, that's sometimes a subject of contention, is exactly how to calculate that. It may require an expert opinion for somebody to say, well, what's a reasonable way to calculate that?
Are you proposing any way to calculate that?
Well, nobody's ever defined what the time frame is for that. There's no definition that I know of where this is the time frame you have to use for, and it depends on what the documents are. Maybe a mineral lease might have that defined, but it's got to be over some time period, right? So obviously, if it's paying quantities, revenues must exceed expenses. That part's easy. I think the harder part is, well, is that over 90 days or a year or 2 years or 5 years? What's the criteria on the time frame?
Right. Do you have any thoughts on that, an appropriate time frame?
I haven't really thought that through. I haven't really thought that through, actually, as to give you a definite answer on that.
Okay. And any thoughts on specific factors that might be included in that paying quantity analysis?
Well, if you look at this is an issue with your revenues, and you've also got an issue with projecting revenues. So, for example, during COVID, when we had negative oil prices, there was a period there where you could have said, well, none of your wells are producing and paying quantities right now, and all my expenses are ongoing. Obviously, it's all your operating expenses. I don't think you would allocate overhead. That's not a normal way to do it. I think you would do it on a well basis. So I don't think you would allocate your office overhead, but you would maybe have direct operating expenses related to operating that well. And then you need to take into account whatever you can sell the product for, and you're going to need to take into account any differentials, all those kinds of things that you have to calculate. And you have a revenue minus expenses, basically. Does that make sense? Am I answering your question?
No, I appreciate it. Just wondering if you had any, you could bring any light to what does appear to be a ongoing discussion. I'll move on. So I believe on slide 89 on your rebuttal, and I'm sorry, I don't have the document. Perhaps someone can bring it up, but we may not need to. You were referring to environmental costs. I'm wondering if you can shed some more light on what costs you are including in that.
Well, I don't remember the exact context of that,
We
but
can bring it
I
up.
could tell you. Could
Thank
somebody
you.
bring that up so I can look at it? But
Appreciate that.
Mr. Grazer, you said slide 89 of the rebuttal, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
let's see. You say slide 89 or page 89?
Slide 89.
Okay. My slides don't have numbers on them, I'm afraid. Oh, okay, good. Okay, all right. Let's see. Where does it talk about environment? Oh, there it is, right there. Yeah, maybe you should ask your question again, please.
Yeah, I mean, so my question is, what are you including in those environmental costs?
Are we talking about V?
Objection. These are not the witnesses' environmental costs. They're from one of the applicant's witnesses, I believe, Mr. Purvis.
Oh, yeah. Mr. Grazer,
Okay, okay. I
I know
appreciate
you
that.
weren't here for the Purvis testimony.
No worries, and I apologize. So let me move on to Mr. Tremaine's comparison of the well and his Nissan Xterra, I believe it was. So he asked you the question, once you sell it, it's the buyer's problem, right? And you said yes, but you hesitated, correct?
Well, yeah, because I'm thinking about the purchase and sale agreements that I've, executed. And when I buy properties, what I try to build into my purchase and sale agreement, and good attorneys would not advise you to take on everything that the guy did to the property before you owned it. I think everybody would agree with that. So that's what my counsel has advised. So now you would love them to take on those liabilities, but they probably won't. So in the experiences I've had, if it's something that I did to the property before they took it over, then that's my problem. And then what I try to do then is I create a baseline for what I make sure that I've taken care of all of my environmental problems before I sell it to them, because I know that I may, beyond anything to do with a commission, you could have a surface owner or, somebody else come back at you if they've found a problem later. So you want to make sure that that's really my only protection, is to go take care of my business in that case. Unless I can talk the guy into taking my environmental liabilities going forward, right? To accept whatever I did before. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
So for instance, a state land office lease may be the source of an ongoing obligation that you can't pass on, right?
Well, that's true. There could be something in I think mainly like the lease I had with the state of Texas, for example. I don't know. I don't recall exactly what was in it, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was something like that in there. Or university lands is another thing in Texas. So I haven't taken a university lands lease, so I'm not that familiar with it. But I don't know that you can completely escape from all that liability. I was on an expert case many years ago where they were basically trying to go after operators that had drilled wells like in the 20s and 30s. I don't know if they were successful or not. But there's like, this is one of the reasons why, if I'm ever going to sell anything, I'm going to clean everything up before I sell it. And I'm going to do my own site assessments, and I'm going to have filed all my paperwork, and I'm going to have done everything correctly. And if there's anything I think might come back to bite me, like unplugged wells, I'm going to go plug those wells. So that's just my approach. Because I'm not sure, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not sure you can totally escape from that liability. Am I answering your question?
It does. You did answer my question, and I appreciate your approach. Thank you. I appreciate your time. I don't have any other questions for you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. I don't know that we have Ms. Nanasi on the platform. Mr. Maxwell, do you have questions of this witness? You may have stepped away. Mr. Rankin, do you have questions?
No questions for this witness. Thank you.
All right. I know EOG is monitoring the proceedings, but does not have questions. Mr. Cloutier.
Just a few, Madam Hearing Officer. Good morning, Mr. McGowan. We met yesterday for the first time here in this room, but my name's Drew Cloutier, and I represent the Independent Petroleum Association of New Mexico. Just a few questions to follow up on what's been going on here today and in this rulemaking. You present as a prudent operator, and so I want to put you in the situation that's going to occur if this rulemaking is adopted. You're operating some wells that are approaching marginal status, however that's going to be defined on the rules, and you see it. What, as a prudent operator, are your rational choices at that point faced with bonding expense?
One thing I'm trying to understand from the regs, from what I'm reading, is it seems like I may need to proactively put some of my wells into temporary abandonment status to avoid getting into this situation where there's a trigger and then I've got to justify what I'm going to do with it. So I don't quite understand how that works under the regs that they're proposing. So would it be prudent for me to go ahead and try to get them, all those marginal wells in to some kind of temporary abandonment and just shut them in if I had some period to do that, instead of, well, then all of a sudden they all get triggered and next thing you know, I'm in a bind, right? I've got to try to prove what I'm going to do with them in the future. So that's confusing to me under the regs.
Let me try and clarify it. Let's just say you're faced with a binary choice. You're either going to have to bond these wells or not. What is a prudent operator going to do?
Well, depends on whether I think I could do something with them or not. I guess I might have to just plug them. I mean, that's one option, would be to say, do I have the time to figure this out? If I'm going to go test something in one or two of them and see what happens, will I have time to figure out whether it worked and do the other ones? If I don't have time to do any of that, then I'm just probably going to have to plug them, I guess.
And you would plug them even if you were making some money off of them still, but as your operating expenses exceeded or were less than your revenues.
You just have to decide if the carrying cost was worth it and worth having to get the extra bonding and then go through the whole rigmarole of trying to convince everybody that you've got a plan for the future. I mean, you're trying to convince yourself that you've got a plan for a future if you try something new. So you need to get enough data but there, you know, it's a very possible scenario that you might say, I just need to plug these things.
Yeah, and let me, as you've pointed out, when you're facing this decision, either plug or incur the bonding expense and see if you're going to be able to do something. Well, I'm going to assume some facts, not in evidence. I'm going to assume that Swazo Operating Company is also a prudent operator, and you're a prudent operator. Is it possible that two different prudent operators might look at the same situation differently? One might plug and one might keep it.
Yes.
As a person with about 40 years experience in the oil and gas industry, do you believe that if faced with this choice, the state of New Mexico would lose production, leave producible hydrocarbons in the ground on an overall basis?
You're talking about overall, the overall rules that we're talking about?
Yes, if we're faced with this, again, binary choice, either bond or not to bond, that there will be operators who will choose to plug and therefore leave
Well, I guess,
others hydrocarbons in the ground.
Yeah, let me think about that a minute. Well, there's one particular provision that's the most terrifying from an operator's point of view, which is this 15% thing, because it's like this sudden dramatic change in my whole financial picture, right? That I didn't anticipate going in. So, and I've discovered that, for example, private equity never like negative surprises about money. So, that one right there, I think could push you into a situation where you would be, well, you know, depending on your resources and what, like, I have no idea what the surety market's going to do. So there's huge uncertainty to me. You know, some of the testimony I've heard doesn't sound very good. So could I end up in a situation where I just can't get the bonds? So now what do I do? Well, I just have to start plugging wells. I'm just going to have to get them off the books.
I think you answered my question. You anticipated a couple of others like you did with Mr. Tremaine a couple of minutes ago. Are there federal tax incentives for producing low producing wells that may be defined as marginal wells under a different definition?
Well, this is the thing that I've noticed. Everybody's talking about the marginal well. And the way I've always looked at it is there's actually incentives. So until recent history, everybody wanted to protect the small operator and protect their ability to keep producing. So that, I think it's $25 a barrel. I mean, 25 barrels a day, I think it was. Which is a pretty high number, but it was actually on the opposite side. It was to help you get the marginal production tax credit, which you only got with a certain ridiculously low oil price. But it was actually intended to be an incentive to keep you in business, not to make you plug your wells. And the same thing in Texas has something similar. Louisiana has something similar. Even extending over to inactive wells. You can just find it on the internet pretty easy. They list all these different incentives that are available to cut your severance tax and they're trying to encourage. Those are all designed, and they define their marginal well not as a punishment and to force you as a trigger to kill your well, but as a way to help you keep it online. So it's definitely an apples and oranges kind of thing.
Okay, and can you put some meat on the bone for the commission if you know about this Texas program or Louisiana program, what these incentives look like?
Well, I don't have it memorized, but the one I'm excited about is starting in 2026, Texas is going to have a 100% severance tax abatement for 3 years or with a $750,000 cap if you take an inactive well and you stimulate it. Maybe put a frac on it. So that would take a lot of the risk away of trying a new idea and seeing if you can come up with a refract that'll actually work, or restimulation. So that's just one example. Texas has they actually have one that's sort of the opposite of what we're talking about here, which is, I believe it's if your well's been down for 2 years, if you'll bring it back up to production, you can get a 5-year abatement of your severance tax. And then Louisiana has some things that are similar. They don't call it a marginal well. They call it a incapable well. They have a different term for that.
Okay.
But now I'm not an expert on everything in all the New Mexico regulations, but it did occur to me that the one way to help alleviate some of this would be, along with some sticks that sound like everybody wants to put in place, it'd be great if you had some carrots that would attract investment capital and attract the kinds of entrepreneurs that would bring capital that do have the wherewithal to plug everything properly and do all their environmental due diligence and do the thing, follow the rules, basically.
Thank you for your time, Mr. McGowan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slazo. Do you have some redirect?
I do, Madam Hearing Officer. Mr. McGowan, let's start with some of the questions you were asked about NMOGA offering a proposed definition for beneficial use. Sorry, that's me. Sorry. You recall Ms. Fox asking you whether NMOGA submitted a definition for beneficial use? Sorry, do you recall?
Objection. I didn't ask that.
I believe she did.
Yes, you asked about the beneficial use versus marginal well, yeah?
With the beneficial use discussion, that was all about our proposal. I didn't ask about the NMOGA proposed definition of beneficial use.
I recall that she did. That was my recollection. I guess we can go to the transcript.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I share his recollection. It might be wrong.
Yeah, no, I didn't ask about NMOGA's definition is all I'm saying.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Mr. Slazo.
Do you recall being asked about proposed definitions of beneficial use?
Yes.
Have you reviewed the testimony of NMOGA witness Clayton Sporich?
I'm trying to remember.
I understand there's a lot out there.
Yeah, I'm first off, I'm terrible at names. Another engineering trait, I think, maybe. I don't really remember. I'm sorry. So,
okay. Are you aware of whether Mr. Sporich offered a proposed definition for beneficial use?
Was that here at this testimony, or was it in his written testimony?
Well, he hasn't testified yet, so it would have to be in his written testimony.
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Based upon the discussion and the questions from the commission in this proceeding, are you aware whether NMOGA intends to submit additional proposals to the commission?
I have heard that discussed. Yeah, that they're going to submit some things.
Do you recall being asked about a potential point system or talking about a potential point system for prioritizing orphan wells yesterday?
Yes.
Are you able to provide additional detail about that?
Well, and I realize a lot of people aren't going to like this, but engineers like to use science. So, we know what causes corrosion. We know how that works. We know about cement, right? So, and we also know that I'll give you one example of something that you should probably look for, which is proximity to injection wells. So let's just take an example. If I said I had I've got a well drilled in the 40s and it's been there a long time And I look at the cementing records, and I don't think I've got cement over the zone that they're injecting salt water into. And so that means I could have cross flow of that brine going across the casing on the outside of the casing, right? So I would expect that would be one of my wells I should be worried about, right? That would be a higher risk. So could you come up with a point system? I think so. I think if you did, what you're trying to figure out a way to do is to break the population up into risk groups using first principles of engineering. And you could do some statistical analysis and also do some analytical analysis. If I was given the problem to solve, I would start with these outlier wells, these really big ones, and I'd go through a root cause analysis and figure out why that happened. The technique is called failure mode and effect analysis, FMEA. It's a known technique that's backed up by decades of literature. So I would go figure that out, and then that would be a good way to figure out, okay, what were the things that caused these wells to be these outliers? Because there's the ones that are skewing your plugging costs. Those are the ones you need to go address. They should have, and then you could say, okay, now I'm going to develop a point system based on the known factors, right? And I got a spreadsheet in my head I can visualize I could build.
Very good. And the reason why I asked that is because I wanted to ask if you recall being asked about the LFC report by Ms. Fox and I think Mr. Tremaine.
Yes.
Okay. In your view, is the LFC a perfect estimate as it is?
No, but I don't know that there is such a thing as a perfect estimate, but I think given everything we know now and given all the discussion and sort of like I've been talking about, scrubbing the data properly, making sure you understand if you've got multiple populations within your large population, that you're sampling it correctly, I think you could do a better job of that.
So am I correct to understand that you think that estimate can be improved with additional OCD and perhaps industry data?
Yes.
So you talked about raising capital for projects where others may not see a lot of value. In your opinion, from an operational perspective, how might potential financial backers view the increased costs associated with financial assurance?
Well, it depends on what you're doing, of course. If I'm taking new leases and I don't deal with any of these old wells, that's one scenario. It might push you to do that because you want to stay away from this problem, this whole issue. So that's one possible scenario. Another scenario would be they would want to know, well, what impact are these rules going to have on our operations? And in particular, the big thing that all these folks want to hear is the term running room. So what that means is this is a risk business and a risk mitigation and a risk reduction business. In other words, you have to try something. You've got a hypothesis. You go execute. You see what the results are. That tells you whether your hypothesis was correct or not. And then you need enough evidence that what you're trying to do is working so that you can proceed and then do that on a larger scale. So like I said before, if they're thinking, wow, in the middle of this whole process, I could have a whole bunch of my target wells could get eliminated. If that's unclear, if that's ambiguous or subject to somebody's decision-making outside their control, like I don't know what they're going to do. So at that point, you'd be in a jam trying to raise money to do that. It'd be a lot, if there was, the more concise the process is, the more predictable the process is, the better chance you're going to get, capital attracted. I think that's obvious.
Do you recall Ms. Fox showing you a chart that showed how long wells have been inactive, with some being inactive or temporarily abandoned for in excess of 20 years?
Yes.
And do you recall some of those wells being inactive for as long as 40 years?
Yes.
In your opinion, the fact that these wells have been in that condition for so long, is this a failure of the rules to function as intended, or would this be a failure to enforce over a long period of time?
Well, don't want to throw rocks at anybody, but seems like they probably somebody should have made them plug those really old wells. It sounds, and they're probably the ones that are causing all the problems. I could see how you might have, we got a 40-year-old well. That sounds like something I'd want to be concerned about. Yeah.
Sure. And, I think that, there's plenty of, if you want to call it blame, it's probably too strong a word to go around, but in your opinion, is what applicants are proposing through these rules essentially asking operators to pay for, infractions that occurred many years ago?
Well, I guess you're getting to a point about fairness, maybe. I'm not sure if, I don't know how that enters into this kind of a conversation, but you are probably going to need, that what you're saying is that your folks in the present are going to have to pay for the sins of their forebears, as it were.
Thank you, Mr. McGowan. No further questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Suazo. We're just a few minutes ahead of noon, so let's return at 1, and we'll go to commission questions of Mr. McGowan.
Okay.
Thank you.